Everyone hands up right now. Who's doing this?
What's up, Goonspire gamers? So originally this was going to be a video on 9 post-release and a very in-depth breakdown of her in comparison to other single-target DPS in the game right now. But I ended up just talking about the math behind exponential scaling with Season 2 exclusive Spore card, so I thought this was instead better to make a dedicated video about this instead of repeating topics on 9 that people are already aware of. And honestly, the main purpose of this is to release a short video testing the waters with putting my analysis and guides with video companions. Do let me know if you like it or not, because I don't, it's really to make it more digestible for y'all. I kind of hate talking into mic and video editing, so this is really awkward and I'm definitely not built for it, so don't expect anything high energy or exciting from me. With that being said, let's get into the actual discussion. First, what is exponential scaling? This isn't a high school math class, so I won't get too into it, but it's basically a formula where the variable, typically x, is raised to an exponent or power. Typically this involves multiplying that variable by another example of that variable. I mean, that's what an exponent is. So if we look at this formula for exponential Spore scaling with One Hue Wonder, the 9 build, we can see that rewriting the formula to its standard form makes it more clear that it's exponential, just to clarify that it is indeed exponential scaling. Second, how does Spore enable this? Technically, in a given turn, there will be exponential growth in damage if there are any 2 buffs that interact multiplicatively with each other in stack. However, it's truly relevant in the case of Spore over the course of multiple turns, since combined with other effects which stack over the course of turns like Orlea's growth accel, raised dark condensation, BERYL's firepower, CHIZURU's hit count, etc., the growth becomes exponential at a rate that can potentially surpass just playing consistently every turn, meaning it might actually be optimal in some cases to skip turns without doing damage. So it's potentially not as much of a meme to just skip 10 turns. Comma, semicolon, dash. There is no content currently in the game that this is actually beneficial for over a consistent build. The HP levels of the enemies would need to reach like an effective 400 to 500k HP conservatively, with most players' top-end builds in mind. And like 250k HP absolutely min-maxed for exponential scaling off 9's best Hue setup to be worth it over just playing a more consistent build. Which is to say that whilst the Spore interaction is fun, it's not nearly as broken as most people make it out to be, except it does truly shine in OTK, but it basically just allows any character to OTK this season with the right setup. I've calced a dark condensation setup with Spore and Winged Humanoid on any character to technically have the potential to OTK the 9/9 distortion boss. And if you remember, Season 1 Ecstasy Basic allowed you to do the same thing, and no one thinks Ecstasy needs a nerf now, even if people did vastly overrate Ecstasy early Season 1 before we got Great Rift, right? I expect a very similar kind of lifespan of Spore. I expect it to be very heavily used now for OTKs, and then it probably won't be the meta for Great Rift unless the boss has a lot of HP, which is also possible. Point is, OTK or content that isn't in the game isn't a good metric for balance, in my opinion. And to put it into perspective, a character who has a form of exponential scaling outside of seasonals, Kayron, pretty much the only relevant form after cast nerfs, outside of, again, Spore and seasonal cards, Kayron has not seen any real play despite this, because spending 10 turns to do 1 million damage is not very valuable in the current CZN balance. SG seems to prefer making bosses and enemies balance around killing enemies multiple times with lower HP, or waves of enemies, rather than scaling to one-shot an enemy with a ton of HP, or scaling for the maximum damage possible for one single turn, or overall the course of all turns, right? This could change, and I would love it to actually, but we also need to be realistic and base the value of an interaction off content we actually have instead of what we might get, especially when the content that this would benefit might not even be in Season 2, which means the Spore interaction is probably just for fun. Okay, back to the topic. I want to now compare Spore's interaction in min-max calcs with a few different characters, specifically BERYL, Kayron, 9, and CHIZURU. It's worth noting that basically any character can abuse this interaction because Spore is applied to an entire multi-hit, hence BERYL and CHIZURU, but I am basing this off of who I think is the easiest to set up and highest potential exponential scalars. Basically, CHIZURU is the best exponential scalar given at least 4 turns of skipping. BERYL is the second best, 9 is the third in single target and in AoE. Kayron will generally be superior to all other options, assuming at least 3 targets, and below like 6-ish turns for CHIZURU. Just staring at a graph probably won't give you guys a lot of information, and people probably don't care who scales the highest, more so just how to abuse it. So I'll link the Desmos with its limitations, and if you have any questions on the calculations, let me know. So let's get into their builds that I use for my calcs and rotations and explain how to play them. Keep in mind these are the top end versions for scaling consistently in the highest. Now let's look at the Spore BERYL support build. This is the core of every build besides BERYL herself. Like BERYL as a carry can't use this to support herself, obviously. This is the absolute min-maxed version. Basically, you need to exhaust the opening found so you don't eat your spores, or else you can't exponentially scale over turns, and you can't afford to have it eat up a hand slot. Actually, BERYL can support herself. My bad. I had that in my notes for some reason I thought it didn't, but she can support herself. Alternatively, you could run this easier to hit a version which will scale around 20% worse, but doesn't require pre-duping. AP div up is actually also not needed for Kayron and CHIZURU setups too, so you only need an AP divine if you're running 9 specifically. The strategy is to leave 3 spores in hand at the end of turn, which with Orlea, Softie, and Hugh will leave you with 2 hand spaces. So right, you have 3 spores at the end of turn, which makes 3 more spores at 6 cards at the start of turn in hand, and then you have Hugh and Softie, which makes it so you have 8 cards start of turn, 2 hand spaces to cycle all of your cards. So hand size is very valuable, and you generally need div draw, but there are ways to get around this I'll get to. This is the 9 build. You can see we take Divine Fatal Strike 3. Again, this is to maximize your 2 hand space, so you can get full value out of spore scaling. However, you can also just leave 2 spores in hand at the end of turn instead of 3, and scale around 12% worse, so it isn't impossible to work around many of these limitations. You just won't get to optimize to the highest level to play highest level. So I'm basing my calcs based on like the maximized value, obviously. This is the Orlea deck. Divine Draw Growth Accel is completely needed on her for any semblance of consistency. You'll lose a ton of buffs, the biggest damage decrease on Kayron and 9 by far. I don't recommend taking the upgrade Sacred Cens, which would make draw easier, but would make it so you can only leave 1 spore in hand at the end of turn, which would decrease your scaling by like 30%, unless your upgrade procs after Spore and start of hand draw, in which case it would work fine. I'm not sure about that, so let me know. You need to at least 1 Vuln Divine on Growth Accel if you plan to go through the setup more than 1 time per battle, which is possible with the setup that the builds I've made, because I value making builds with consistency over just for OTK, but you don't need the Vuln Divine if you're just going for OTK. You could just get it through the Softie initial, what's it called, Grung Creature proc. For rotation, going back to BERYL here, you want to use BERYL Guilty Pleasures to get as many spores as possible per proc, while leaving 1 hand space open for cycling. Play Growth Accels on your Hue when you get them, but make sure to wait until Fatal Strike 3 procs on it turn 1, or you'll be buffing the wrong card. Now for Kayron, you will have 3 spaces to cycle your deck instead of the 2 that 9 has, but you don't get to draw on Brand, so it becomes equivalent to the 2 that 9 has because Brand's effectively a dead draw. The Orlea in BERYL decks are the same as 9, but you don't need AP Divines on BERYL Guilty Pleasure. Rotations are the same as the 9 deck. You will just lose buffs depending on when you draw Brand, so I recommend actually cutting your Spore Gen start of turn to 2 in hand, so your scaling will be slightly worse, but you'll have really low odds of your rotation getting mixed up, basically, and like losing buffs. The rotation is basically the same as 9, just hold Growth Accels until you have X Brand in hand, Exhaust Brand. And this works in AoE, so this is like the best. If we get like a multi-target boss where this is relevant against, this would be probably one of the best characters to do it. Amir is another option. Her build is like very hard to pull off compared to Kayron though. Now for CHIZURU, you also have 3 spaces like Kayron, and she can capitalize on that, unlike him. alongside her not needing AB domains. CHIZURU basically is the easiest one to abuse this, although her low end is basically the worst. It's like really bad. Like her turn 1 damage, like if you're doing this for OTK, is worse than all of them. She does outscale all of them by turn 4 basically, because again she's scaling exponentially with the trinomial. Besides Kayron and AoE, she also uses the same BERYL setup but Divine Draw Ray instead of Orlea. Basically you use Ski times 4 with Divine Draw to just add hits to your SOTM or Shadow of the Moon, or wait, is that, yeah, whatever the name is, SOTM. You don't need to upgrade to SOTM plus, it'll just waste buffs and make your setup longer for 1 hit, and basically spending a turn to get 0.5 turns of value you would get. So yeah, just get rid of everything besides Ski and the Divine Draw and this SOTM if possible. You can keep Bound too, it's actually fine in this scenario. This is the Ray deck, very straightforward. You just stack your 100% additive buff to your SOTM while also stacking its hit count with Ski. She's the only truly trinomial scaling unit out of all of these, since you have 3 different units scaling over many turns and all are multiplying with each other. Keep in mind that CHIZURU, BERYL, Spore carry, and any multi-hitter will be much worse versus bosses with elasticity, which seems to basically be the standard now. So even though CHIZURU is the highest scaling exponential unit over the course of multiple turns right now, it doesn't actually matter because they cap out your scaling at 7 hits. So yeah, so just keep that in mind. So with elasticity, she's by far the worst out of these. Like she's worse than units not mentioned, and BERYL is also pretty bad. But let's get to BERYL. Since you're using BERYL as the carry, she will not be able to support your Spores. Actually, that's not true. Again, for some reason I thought you were duping another card, but you're not. So Orlea is used for Orlea is actually used for her own growth accel. So the same Orlea deck, but you can replace a Sacred Sense with Will of Light in this scenario. It's up to you. And you use the multi-hit one since the CHIZURU, it's another form of scaling, but unlike her, it doesn't scale infinitely across turns since you're capped. Basically, you make Spores through Orlea until pop-off turn, when you would use all your Orlea buffs on your opening found card. Actually, I think in all of these builds, a Will of Light will be preferred. I'll update this in post, so the previous builds will have Will of Light instead of Sacred Sense. You cannot use Upgrade if you want to scale exponentially scale across turns, because your extra attacks will consume the Spores at the end of turn. But it's good to use Spores for turn-to-turn DPS, since it works like other multi-hits and will get full value. Also because of this, she basically is the best one at abusing Spores for every turn, even though you won't scale as good infinitely as the others. Her low turn count use with Upgrade version is certainly worth considering. It's actually one of the better uses of Spore for like consistency, but for the sake of scaling over the course of many turns, you just can't use the Upgrade one because it'll eat it after 1 turn. And that's it. If you have any questions or want a breakdown of a specific team further, or you think I'm missing a really good abuser of Spores, let me know in the comments or replies. Basically, anyone I left out will have trouble setting it up easily. Like I mentioned, Emir can outscale Kayron for AoE because she hits 5 times with her AoE, but her setup is just more annoying than his in my opinion. And actually, on that, I think Emir is a very underrated unit. So if you're curious about my thoughts on that, I could do that for my next guide or analysis. Bye.